Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Filter. On this show, we recognize that the world can be a confusing place to live in. And so what I seek to do on this show is to equip you to live with biblical clarity in our confusing world so that you can face the chaos of life with wisdom, integrity, and courage. When you're looking for favorite writers online, it can often be difficult to find ones that are really worth following. There's a lot of voices that are simplistic, boring, or too reactionary in their thinking. One of my favorite writers to follow over the last few years has been Bethel McGrew. She previously wrote under the pen name Esther O'Reilly. I'm excited to have her on today's episode to talk about her story as a writer, her writing process, and other topics related to current events and culture. Dr. Bethel McGrew is a math Ph.D., high school teacher, and widely published freelance writer. Her articles have appeared in many Christian and mainstream outlets, including First Things, The Spectator, National Review, Plough, and more. She has also contributed 2 essay anthologies on the work of Jordan Peterson. She currently maintains a Patheos blog called Young Fogey and a newsletter called Further Up, which is one of the top 20 faith newsletters on Substack. I appreciate you guys, the audience, here on Filter so much. I want to continue to bring you better quality as well as more content. So I'm excited to share with you guys that you can now send in voicemails to Filter to share your thoughts and reflections on our episodes. If you've ever been listening to one of my conversations with a guest and you've had a question or thought pop into your head, you can now send in that question or thought through voice messages. This is going to be awesome because I want to be able to hear from you guys, but it's also going to be great because I will be sharing select voicemails in future bonus episodes that I will interact with, answer if there are questions, or respond to if there are comments or other general feedback. I'm really looking forward to this and excited to be able to do it. And so send in your questions and reflections through the link that is included in the show notes and description below so that you can leave up to a 1-minute voice message. You can also leave feedback and questions by commenting on social media posts, or YouTube, or responding in the questions feature on Spotify. I really look forward to getting these feedback questions and comments from you guys and interacting with them in those future episodes that I'll be releasing soon. Before we dive into this episode, let me just take one more moment to encourage you to subscribe to our email list so that you can get all of our newest content sent directly into your inbox. Just visit the link in the show notes and you can sign up on my website. Also, be sure that you're subscribed to Filter wherever you get your podcasts so that you can get all future episodes right on your homepage. If you're helped by this content, we'd really appreciate it if you left us a rating and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Leave Filter a 5-star rating on Spotify, and if you would take the time to write a review on Apple Podcasts, that'd really help us out as well. Whenever you take these simple steps, it greatly helps us to get the message of biblical clarity out to more people. Well, without any further delay, let's jump into this conversation that I got to have with Dr. Bethel McGrew. Bethel, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Aaron. Great to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you on. It's been something I've been looking forward to, and so I decided to finally reach out and see if you'd want to come on. And I'll admit I was a little nervous because a few months ago I had almost revealed your true identity on Twitter, and you were frantically messaging me. And whenever I realized what I had done, I felt horrible.
You were not the first one, though. It's okay. Like, it's actually you were not the first nor the worst near miss. So don't feel too bad.
Yeah. Well, I felt awful about it, and you were really gracious, and so I was like, all right, I'm going to reach out and. I hope that I didn't miss out.
Below your capital. No.
Yeah. But anyway, been looking forward to it. I love your writing. Been loving following your growth as a writer. I think I started following you right before you got onto Patheos. It's just been great and enjoyable to see.
You followed me for the whole 3.5 years or so now that it's been roughly. that feels weird. That's been quite an eventful few years.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we originally got connected through your dad because I was talking to him about Jordan Peterson, and then he passed me on to you. He said, "Here, you really need to talk to Bethel." He was like, "She's the one you need to talk to," and so that's how we got connected. And then I learned about your writing. But anyway, let's talk about that. You used to write under a pen name named Esther O'Reilly. So you had this secret identity that you were writing behind. You're kind of like Batman, and you grew in popularity, and then only recently, I think it was how long ago was it? About 4 or 5 months
It
ago
was
now.
either October, November, last
Okay,
fall.
yeah, you had a coming out piece where you revealed your true identity, and now you're writing under your true name. So anyway, what was that experience like, going from your undercover name to your real one, revealing your true identity to the world, and so on? What was that like?
Well, I mean, the build up was pretty nerve wracking, just because it was something I'd been thinking about for a really long time, and um, always felt like I would want to do it eventually. I just was waiting for the right moment. Um, so 2021 was a significant year for me in a few different ways. It was the year that I graduated, wrapped up my Ph.D. in math, and it was also the year that I landed my first job, teaching at a small high school. So um, I had kept my identity under wraps for all that time because it felt like my future was sort of in flux as far as where exactly I was going to go, what exactly I was going to do. So I was trying to keep all of my different options open because that's just my personality. I'm a naturally very cautious, risk averse kind of a person. Um, and I first began writing way back when I was 18, I think. And it was my own folks who advised me to take a pen name then, because they knew that I wanted to try and write about some political topics. And they were like, listen, you don't know where you're going to go. You're thinking you might want to go into academia. So, um, don't take an unnecessary risk and put this stuff out under your own name, which was wise at the time, I think. So, I mean, at that very early stage, it was just a fun little kind of hobby for me. And I remember like the first time that I got a freelance paycheck, I wrote something for the stream, and it was like, whoa, I just got $150 in the mail to write an article. This is amazing. And so, but then it was 2018 that I began to get more traction with the joining Patheos and with my writing around Jordan Peterson, which is when we connected. So that when that piece went viral, that sort of set off a little bit of a cascade. Different doors started opening, and I started to get in at different magazines, different outlets, and expanding the range of things I wanted to write about besides Peterson and the IDW, because people wanted to know what I had to write about that, but I wanted to talk about lots of things. I had all kinds of cultural commentary and stuff to get out. And then I hopped on the Substack bandwagon last year. So, putting together the fact that my platform was growing, that I thinking a lot about status, the status game around this, like how important was it to me to keep my identity cloaked if the price was that people still just saw me as basically an anonymous blogger. Because I felt like increasingly as I was weighing in on, these big social issues, and COVID changed a lot. The whole vaccine debate, which like we don't have to get into, but that's something I became personally invested in because my mother was vaccine injured. And it was something that I increasingly felt like I had to speak up about. So that was one factor among many in there that I felt like, maybe it's probably better if I'm just fully integrated so that I can be completely honest with people, like, yeah, I have a personal stake in this, but that's not why I've reached the conclusions I have, but I should probably start being more open about that. and then I think just generally feeling like I should just take ownership of what I write. Um, and, that if I could get to a place of some security job wise, which I feel like I am at currently, although, who knows what the future might hold, that I would have kind of a responsibility to speak for other people who still have to be in the closet. You know, that was something I came to feel was important, and just feeling like I didn't want to be a fragmented person. I didn't want to be a compartmentalized person. I wanted the writers me, the writer me, the teaching me, all these different parts of me to be unified. Um, so, but it took me a long time to get there, and then the actual process of doing it was surprisingly very liberating. And very encouraging because all kinds of people came out with positive messages, encouraging me, telling me how proud they were that I'd taken the step. It also felt really good to be able to thank a lot of people because as I wrote that piece, I kept thinking of all the different people who'd played a role in my growth as a writer and encouraging me over the years. So it was cool to put that all in one place and go like, wow, I have a long list of great people to thank. Um, so really, it's been positive. Now, maybe 5 years from now, the other shoe is going to drop, and I'm going to be canceled and wind up destitute and homeless. But I don't know. Like, we'll see. But for now, I'm loving it. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah, and the the article that you wrote whenever you were coming out with your true identity really was it was a beautiful piece.
Oh, thank you.
So well
So sweet.
written. Yeah, it was really, really incredible. And yeah, and so I can see that it must have been a really, really a process that was a lot more than just a professional decision. But yeah, there's definitely some really personal aspects to it that were interplaying with the decision and wrestling, and how I can hear even in what your story, there was somewhat of like really who am I and who do I want to be
Yeah,
in
it was
this, because it was more than just a pen name, but it was kind of like you
a
said, I
persona,
think that's interesting. Yeah. It's almost two identities that you were, um,
a little
yeah, or
bit.
two personas you were living with.
Right. And even when I had the persona, um I always tried to think carefully, like, am I saying something as Esther that I wouldn't say as me? Um am I really am I creating this as like a repository for something, which occasionally people would sort of accuse me of that and be like, well, you've chosen to do this anonymous thing where you just whatever. And I would think, okay, is that what I'm doing? And I would try to ask myself that honestly. And I really don't think so because I am naturally a very forthright personality. I mean, anybody who knows me in real life knows that it was always pretty WYSIWYG. It was always pretty what you see is what you get. And I feel like now that I've come out, and I don't think my tweeting has changed that much. Maybe I'm a little more, you mature, you grow as in the natural course of things. But I was pretty forthright then, and I'm pretty forthright now. Um, but I did feel like I needed to shed the fear. I needed to shed the anxiety. And I had an interesting exchange with my mother because as I was thinking about this, playing with this idea earlier the year, she was very supportive, like, you do what you feel like you want to do. But she was kind of asking me like, but why would you though? I mean, what's the risk reward analysis? What would you gain from coming out? Um, and then a couple months after I'd done it, she came back to me and she said, I get it now. I really understand because she said, I always raised you, your father and I always raised you to, um, you know, to that you need to have courage. You need to approach life with courage. You need to live in a fearless way. And as I think about it now, I see how this was a part of that for you, and that was something that you needed to do, something you had to take into your own hands, a step you had to take, and it was a part of coming of age in some sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And courage is one of my favorite topics. It's one that I speak on and write on frequently. And so, what did you learn about fear and courage through that experience?
Well, I think Yeah, so I mean, I think this goes back to my personality in general of just always wanting to be in control. I was a very good chess player when I was a kid, so I got used to being able to analyze things 10 steps ahead and be able to kind of plan for every eventuality. So um, I had been I'd been viewing my life like a chess game in that sense, where it's like, okay, if I go there and he goes there and I go there, but then I'm okay because on move 8 I have this little tactic I could do. Phew, okay, now I have that all squared away. And life is not like that. Real life is unpredictable. There are things you have to leave in the hands of God. So this step was me sort of coming to terms with that, and just saying, you know, yeah, I can't predict the future with perfect clarity. I can't analyze this all the way out to move 10. Um, there are things that I'm just not going to know about what this decision could mean down the road. And meanwhile, there probably are certain types of doors that are going to close, certain types of jobs that, um, are going to be trickier for me to land at this point. Um, on the other hand, maybe those aren't the kinds of jobs that I would have been trying to get anyway. But I think it was bound up with, specifically as a Christian, with needing to entrust my future to God, um, and just accept the fact that we don't always know what's going to happen, and then take it a step at a time and trust that God is going to uh, guide me and use me wherever He wants me to be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I think that's usually where courage lies. It lies in God calling us into some kind of an unknown,
Hmm.
or calling us
Yeah, man.
into a
I could
step
do
that
the
is,
Jordan Peterson voice.
or
You're
calling us
conquering
into,
your fear of the unknown. You have to slay the dragon of your future, man. Like, so, yeah.
yeah, I can't even attempt to impersonate him. It would just be, it would be awful. But yeah, yeah, Peterson all the way. But yeah, calling us into an unknown, or into, like you said, a dragon, a fear, and
It's
then
the adventure of the future. Yeah.
yeah, and then courage is in our responsibility to take that step, then to heed the call, and so that's what you did. That's great. I love your writing. Your writing style is excellent. I wish that I could write as half as well as you do.
Oh, thank
What
you.
have been some of your primary writing influences? How did
That
what who and yeah who formed you as a writer?
that's a really great question. Yeah, because there were a number of different writers that I read growing up. One name I come back to as I think about this is Peggy Noonan. Um, she was Ronald Reagan's speechwriter back in the day. Uh, became a columnist, and I remember reading a biography she did of Reagan that impacted me a lot when I was a kid. And I really like her style. She was very lyrical, very earnest, um, very just sort of unabashed admirer um, of great men, of truth and goodness and beauty. And she just always had a great way um, of setting those things up. So I would definitely point to her. Let me think. Lewis, obviously, yeah. I mean, kind of a cliched answer, but um, definitely the way I think about cultural evangelism, cultural apologetics, um, trying to try to take true things and then encapsulate them in an engaging way. I you really can't beat Lewis, and so he's somebody I go back to again and again
Yeah,
for sure. Um, yeah, there's definitely lots of others that I could think of, but whenever somebody asks me, I tend to kind of blank out and give cliched answers. But those are just like two biggies that come to mind.
yeah, no, good ones indeed. Um, yeah, and I can definitely see some of Lewis's influence in the way that you do cultural engagement and evangelism. So that's not just cliche. I can see that. I think that's a good answer. How would you describe what is like your unique voice though?
My
Like
yeah,
what is it that you're going for when you write a piece, whether it be on cultural analysis, one of your film critiques, because and I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit, but like you write on a really wide range of topics,
yeah,
issues, and so on. So like what's the voice that you go for that you've discovered
yeah.
as you've grown as a
Well,
writer?
and you mentioned film, which reminds me, I also love Roger Ebert. Um, so definitely, when I write film criticism, I'm always going back and uh, looking at his stuff to remind myself how he would turn a review. So that's a really good question because I've always been um, kind of a mimic in my life. So I've always kind of had this ability to pull out all different hats and just try them on. Um, because I'm just sort of insatiably curious and I'll kind of fall into, 10 different niches in the span of 3 minutes. Um, so, I mean, what voice I'm going for, it can be context dependent. It can depend on what audience I'm writing to, what kind of thing it is that I'm writing. Um, because it does vary. So for cultural analysis, um, first of all, am I writing to the church or am I writing to um, an eclectic, maybe non-church audience? So, um, if I'm writing cultural analysis for the church, then um, I'm trying to be informative, but I'm trying to sort of get to the heart of the issue. Um, I like to sort of cut through jargon. That's something that characterizes all my writing. I really dislike wasting time with jargony things. I want to state things as clearly as possible. Um, I want to lay out issues as honestly as possible and be like, okay, well, what's really going on here? What are we really looking at? Um, and that can step on toes a little bit because sometimes it involves calling people out. It's saying like, okay, so and so just is dishonest. Like this person really is, disingenuous or whatever. And I'm willing to name names occasionally when I do that. So, sometimes people will say that's bad tone or whatever. But, sometimes you got to do what you got to do in that
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Um, but then some of my favorite things that I write are kind of swing free of culture war stuff where I'm just I'm telling a story. Maybe I'm um, telling a story that a friend shared with me, or I'm thinking about something inspiring that I saw in the news, or I'm doing some literary reflection or cinema reflection, film criticism. Um, and that's some of my favorite writing to do because I really love human interest stuff. Like I love thinking about what makes people tick, sort of meditating on human nature and all of the glorious and beautiful but also terrible things about us. And fiction was really my first love growing up. I read a lot of that under my mom's teaching because mom has a Ph.D. in literature. Um, so in some ways, I write nonfiction like a frustrated fiction writer. Um, that's what I tell people. I channel some frustrated fiction writing energy into my nonfiction. Um, so you know, I'm willing to write the more culture war-y stuff because I do think there's a place for it, and I am good at it because I am good at that kind of analysis. But it's a little bit taxing, and it's not necessarily my favorite kind of thing to write. And people can sometimes come away with the impression that I'm a pugilist, that I like to go out looking for debates or looking for a fight. Um, when it's really more complicated than that. It's just that I have different hats. I have these different tools. I think I'm able to help the church in some of that I do. But I try as much as possible to make it not be the only thing I do. Because I sometimes do see people where that's all they do. That's all they think about. It's all they write all the time. And I mean, I'm not saying that they're in bad faith or anything, but I do occasionally want to maybe suggest, hey, have you like considered, I don't know, just taking the day off, going and reading some poetry or something?
Yeah.
I don't know,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I imagine that kind of a life would, and yeah, I don't want to ascribe anything to anyone else or assume, but it seems like it would have to hollow you out at a certain point.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Especially when you consider that like 98% of our culture wars exist purely online.
Yeah.
And as soon as you get off of Twitter, you're surrounded by the real world and real people and these relationships that are infinitely more valuable to you than any retweets and reactionary arguments and so on. And those things are so much more filling to the soul. That's what I find, is that I feel like the days or weeks where, at the end of the week, I realize I've spent way too much time on social media this week. The best way I can describe the experience is like, it feels like my chest is hollowed out.
Mm.
Like it was sucking something out of me that I should have been looking for in the real world and the real relationships around me. And those things actually fill me. So I
Yeah,
agree with
and
you. I don't see how someone could purely live in that world.
yeah, and to a degree, I try to draw on those kinds of things as a way to kind of feed back into my writing. And so, um, especially like so for my Substack, there's a free tier and then a paid tier. So I tend to use the paid tier for more kind of evergreen reflections, personal essays, stuff that's not so tied to the news cycle. Um,
Hmm.
and so when I write those kinds of pieces, I'll sometimes kind of dip into um, you know, personal reflection. So like the last thing I wrote, I did something for Ash Wednesday about prayer, and I was writing about just sort of the nature and the how quiet it is where I live. I live kind of outside town in a little rural spot, and I talked about praying and how I use silence as a backdrop for that. Occasionally, I'll write about something sweet or profound that a person said to me in real life, and I'll work that in.
Yeah.
So you can you can draw inspiration from that as a writer, and it enriches your work that way.
Yeah. One of our mutual friends, Tom Gilson, I remember I was in a little workshop session that he did on writing a long time ago. And he said that the best writers are people who just go out searching for experience,
Yeah,
and then they write out of that experience. And I think that's so true, and resonates. And I'm reminded of that in what you had just shared. But talking about writing method, what's your writing method? How do you choose topics to write on? We already touched on that a little bit, but choosing topics to write on, or this I'm going to pass on, where to publish, when do
yeah,
you write? I mean, just the nuts and bolts of how you go about putting your pieces out.
yeah. So I mean, right, it varies because there's a couple different kinds of things that I try to keep up. So let's see. Well, okay, just thinking about like a typical week. So like this week, I've got three upcoming things that I want to get out. Was hoping to get out before break. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But so for my Patheos blog, which I'll be honest, I've been kind of neglecting more and more because I've shifted a lot of my energy to the Substack. Um, but in my mind, I've sort of taken to using the Patheos as a place to write about church culture war stuff. And then for my Substack, because I have an audience that's not necessarily really plugged in, doesn't really care about that kind of thing, I pitch things to more of a general audience. Um, so for my Patheos this week, I think I'm going to write something about some of these the new leaked stuff with Francis Collins, um, and like some of these candid comments that he was making about abortion research and COVID
Yeah,
mandates and all that sort of stuff.
yeah,
So I have in mind kind of a take there about some of the evangelicals who enabled him, and then kind of the broader pattern that I see of evangelicals wanting to have a seat at the table, and how we saw that with Trump with one kind of evangelical tribe, and now I think we're seeing that with Collins with a different evangelical tribe, and so they're really kind of two sides of the same coin. Um, but and that's kind of a take that I don't really see people making. So that's one big thing. Like I try to think about, okay, what's something that I can say here that other people aren't saying already?
hmm
What's
yeah,
something that's it's going to be something fresh. It's going to bring something new to the discourse. So I'm thinking about that for my Patheos. And then at the same time, I want to write something about the Don't Say Gay bill for the American Reformer. So that's more of a site for like meta commentary, cultural criticism. So, like the kind of thing Carl Trueman might write. So that that's a space that I haven't written in before, but they're new and growing, and I like what they're doing. So that's something I want to do. I want to kind of keep my finger on the pulse of some of these big changes. And again, there's lots of takes flying around about that bill currently. And so I want to talk about the sort of modern liberal response to the bill. Like, well, what does this bill really do? Is it really a big deal or not? How should conservatives think about it? How should we respond to a certain way of framing it? And what does this say about some broader fissures in our culture wars? So, that's that kind of a piece.
Yeah.
And then for my Substack, I want to write, because I'm kind of due to write another paid thing. I've been thinking a lot about the propaganda wars with the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And there was one moment in particular that was really moving. It was one of these early viral clips where people thought that it was a Ukrainian father saying goodbye to his little girl. And then it turned out it was mislabeled, and it was actually a Russian father sending his family back to Russia before going to fight against Ukraine. So suddenly, like, it's the exact same clip, but the whole frame shifts, the whole narrative shifts. So you go back and you watch it again. How does it change? How does it change your emotions, your reactions? Does it make the clip different? And especially as a Christian, how does one think about it? And how does one think about Russia and the Russian people in general, and the tragedy of this conflict? So, I haven't really, my thoughts on that are still kind of foggy. A lot of times, to be honest, I just sort of sit down in front of a blank page with a hazy idea of what I want to write, and I kind of noodle around and tap out some paragraphs and then delete some things and reshuffle other things until I have what I want to say. But I kind of want to sort of write something more from the heart about that. And then also I'm putting like some last tweaks on something I'm writing for Plough magazine, because they're going to do some music-related pieces coming up this spring. And I got asked if I wanted to write something about Rich Mullins, who's one of my favorite.
Oh, yeah.
Great singer-songwriter. And
I've seen your previous articles about him.
Yeah. It's interesting. I feel like I can really, you were talking about how I've grown as a writer. So I can sort of measure my growth as a writer by looking at kind of the evolution of Rich Mullins tributes that I've written over the years, because I can I wrote that at that phase, and that, so this one that I've written is definitely my most mature yet. So it's great to kind of revisit his catalog and his life and plunge back into all of that. Now with kind of a more seasoned eye, being able to frame my thoughts in, maybe a slightly less breathless way. Because that was one fault that I had in my early years as a writer was that everything was an 11 out of 10. And if I thought something was great, it was the greatest thing ever in the whole entire world since the dawn of time, So I've learned to kind of, sort of pull it back, be a little bit more measured, get my thoughts a little more organized, so that's just part of growing as a writer. But then with the Rich Mullins thing, that's part of keeping my creative interests going as a writer. Like, I always want to be writing about something in the arts, if it's whether it's music or film or literature. So always want to have that kind of simmering on the side. So that's a sort of a typical slice, a typical week in my writing life.
Yeah. How many hours a week do you spend writing?
That's a really good question, because it can vary. Sometimes I can go a couple of weeks writing hardly anything, or maybe writing only one thing, and then I'll have a week where I suddenly get some time and I write 3 things in a row. So The nature of freelance work is it's really sporadic and all over the place.
Yeah.
But I would say that if in a week where I'm getting any writing done at all, probably it takes me, maybe 10, 12 hours to get a couple good pieces together. It
Yeah.
generally takes a little more time than I plan on. So sometimes I'll sit down all confident, like, I'm just going to knock this piece out tonight and publish it in the morning. And then I realize, nope, I need to take a little more
Yeah.
time with this, but it's okay. I can publish it the day after that. But so, you get cocky when you're experienced, but it's like, no, even with experience, some things take some time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love or hate when that happens to you as a writer. You have something in your mind that you're like, oh, I've already got this. I've got the outline. I've got my big points. I've got my really catchy phrases, and then you sit down and it all falls apart.
Yep. But I
And then
find,
sometimes the opposite happens.
yes, exactly. I do find though this is few other people feel this way too, but beginning could sometimes be the trickiest part for me. And like once I have my hook, my way in, first few lines, first paragraph, then the rest of it tends to sort of come together for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. It for me, I always see it as like I just need a really long warm up.
Mm,
So fitness is a big part of my life aside from ministry and writing and podcasting. And so you warm up before you exercise. And I've just learned in myself over the years, even when it comes to like writing sermons for the church that I'm a pastor of, I just need a really long warm up. I just have to sit there and, like you said before, kind of stare at a blank screen,
yep.
try a couple of different introductions, and the magic usually hits. And I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say a long warm up. The magic usually hits for me at about 45 minutes. If
Yes.
I can just endure for about 45 minutes of feeling like a failure,
Hmm.
then something starts to happen.
Right.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
uh,
And also, like with head, and hopefully you have a better sleep schedule than I do, but I have a terrible sleep schedule, and um, often inspiration strikes at like literally the middle of the night, and so it'll be 1 in the morning, and I'm three-quarters of the way done. It's just clickety clackety clack, and then it's like, and I kind of squint at the clock. I'm like, it'll be another 5 hour night. Oh well, I've done that before. It's like it's really not sustainable or good for me. So I know that I'm going to have to get it together here, um, because I could do so much more if I slept more. Couldn't we all?
yeah, I know. If only. Yeah, my inspiration usually hits like right in the middle of me doing something or taking care of my kids.
Yeah.
So like, oh, I can't get away and write right now because I'm taking care of them. But anyway,
Well, that's when you pull out your phone. You make like a little voice memo or something.
yeah,
So I
I
mean,
have
if
done that.
it's, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. But you were mentioning on a few minutes ago you're working on a piece with Russia and Ukraine, and so that, obviously that's a big headline right now. And I don't want us to spend time on culture wars or real wars too much. But just I am interested because you're one of my favorite voices to hear this kind of commentary on. What your been his take? I messed up that sentence. What your take has been lately on not just the conflict itself, but particularly um, the propaganda aspect, and then how people have been reacting to it and interpreting it online, the different major leading voices. What's been your take on this whole situation we've been through? And just, I think it's only been 2 weeks now.
yeah. A lot has happened for sure. And I mean, it's interesting to see how certain voices will they began one way and then they sort of shifted. So I wrote something for the Substack about Tucker Carlson, um, and and how he was at the very beginning of it, he was framing it as, listen, American conservatives, this is like something that's happening way over there in Europe. It's not really like, what did Putin ever do to you? Let's talk about domestic culture war stuff instead. That's
Yeah,
like the really relevant stuff to you at this point in time, which seemed to me like a really disingenuous way of framing it. Um, and so, I mean, I like some stuff that Tucker has said, He can be good for owning the libs, for whatever that's worth. But the way that I that was it was a very clarifying moment for me, I think, and really sort of highlighted um, this corrupt demagogic aspect of his populism and how he's just trying to say what people want to hear, um, and trying to sort of um, desensitize people to who Putin actually is and what Putin is actually doing. And I mean, I hate to say it, but like even Rod Dreher in the past has done a little bit of this thing, like, well, I'm not a fan of Putin, but at least he understands culture wars, or at least he's good on that stuff. While meanwhile, we're doing this crazy gender identity stuff or whatever. And that's where I think some voices like Douglas Murray, for example, have been more savvy and sensible. Like, wait a minute, wait. Putin is totally corrupt. Putin doesn't care about culture wars. He's just, these regimes like Russia and also China are playing the West. They're using this as leverage for their own totally corrupt ends. So that's a blind spot that I've seen in certain corners of the right. And then in the integralist corner, so like Sohrab Ahmari and some of those kind of voices, there's been weirdness there as well.
Yeah.
With like, I don't want to say admiration because that's too strong a word, but like this weird way that they would sort of look to Russia or look to China as like, well, at least they're doing this, at least they're getting that right or whatever, while overlooking, for one thing, the brutal persecution of Christians, of like non-establishment church Christians, which has been ongoing for decades and decades, and is just awful. So that's a frustration that I see. But the problem then is that I also see it can be difficult to kind of thread this needle, because I don't in fact think that we should go to war. I agree with the dovish voices who are saying, no, we shouldn't establish a no-fly zone. We shouldn't send troops over there. We don't want to engage with a nuclear power. This is not wise or prudent. Okay, I agree with that. But it can be difficult to find people who are saying sensible things like that without also bleeding into, semi-excusing Putin or blaming the victim, or saying that Ukraine is just as bad as Russia as far as propaganda goes. And, it's not that, like, I'm not saying that I know Ukraine is above propaganda. I mean, that may not be true. Maybe they have engaged in some of their own propaganda. But at the same time, it is clear that Putin is committing verifiable war crimes. He is committing verifiable monstrosities. And we should just be able to admit that without a, well, yeah, but, or without this weird kind of both sidesing that I see at certain corners. So I was just in a Twitter Spaces last night with Colin Redimer, who wrote something on Just War at American Reformer. And I liked the tone of that space. I thought he was striking a good balance there. So, my heart goes out to Zelensky. My heart goes out to the Ukrainian people as they fight for their lives and their nation and their identity. But at the same time, it's a tragic thing, but it could be that Ukraine winds up being the price paid for not entering a nuclear holocaust, which sounds very stark, but Putin is so unpredictable that there's only so much that we can do. And I think in general, I favor a generally cautious approach to entering global conflicts, because historically that hasn't panned out the way that hopeful neocons might predict.
Yeah, absolutely. How would you describe your political perspective or affiliation?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a pretty classic conservative. I grew up. My mom marched with Phyllis Schlafly back in the day. Ronald Reagan was her and my dad's first vote. I have a Reagan poster on my bedroom wall. So I very much am kind of a throwback to that old style conservatism. So which means that I didn't get on the Trump train. And even before Trump, we were all kind of a family of purists. We were like, but can we really vote for Romney? Can we really vote for McCain? Well, let's check. Oh, no, I don't like his record on embryonic stem cell research. Or, we were pretty strict. Like, you had to really check a lot of boxes. So we were certainly not going to get on the Trump train. That was never a danger for us. But at the same time, I'm not really on the never Trump train either. As in terms of how that's evolved. I don't like. So I mean, I'm the person who was a David French fangirl back in the day, and am definitely not anymore with the direction that he's gone. But yeah, I'm very solidly conservative, and I dislike. I'm very troubled to see where the Republican Party is sort of drifting, and especially on social issues around sexuality. So the whole gay marriage thing, after that ship sailed, it's sort of interesting to see how many conservatives have sort of invisibly drifted, so that now, it's there's not really, I think, going to be much difference between the Republican Party and the Democrat Party going forward on that whole cluster of issues. And so, but I'm one of those purist conservatives who's like, well, I mean, yes, I agree that in practice, socially, the ship has sailed, but in principle, it shouldn't have. And we should continue writing and speaking on the assumption that it shouldn't have, and we shouldn't shift in that respect. And then fiscally, economically, I'm also quite conservative. And so, when I listen to certain post-liberals, the way that they talk, they could be good at diagnosing social issues, but then they'll go off on, sort of semi-socialist rabbit holes. And it's like, well, wait a minute. That's not where we want to go. So it's like, we kind of need like bits of everything, so like,
yeah,
we need a kind of a good libertarian backbone on certain fiscal issues, but then keep the old school conservative social values. So don't go libertarian there. So this is kind of my build a conservative, but there's not really a market for it at this point in time is the problem.
Yeah. So going back to writing, what's been one of the most difficult pieces you've ever written?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. A difficult piece.
Difficult for whatever reason.
Yeah, difficult for whatever reason. Well, okay, so one piece or one or two pieces, I guess. So I don't know if you were familiar with a figure named Mike Adams. Okay, so just kind of a brief. That's kind of interesting that you don't know who he is, but just kind of a brief sketch. He was a conservative writer and speaker. He had a column at Town Hall, and he was a gadfly. He was a political science professor at the South, and he survived multiple cancellation attempts. He went to court with a religious liberty case back in the day. And he was a bit of a Lenny Bruce figure. He had a sort of a sharp edge to what he wrote. He could be very funny. He could be, he liked to push the envelope. And he was very, very well loved in conservative circles. He was an adult convert to Christianity and conservatism. And so then he became a very passionate pro-life speaker. That was something he spoke and debated on a lot. Kids loved him. He invested in young people, Christian ministry conferences. But, he also had some personal issues. And in 2020, summer 2020, he took his own life. And that had huge ripple effects throughout the conservative Christian community, throughout the pro-life community. Just so many people that he had touched, that he loved, who loved him back. So I decided to write a couple of things about that. And that was difficult because it was so dark, and I had to kind of search for the appropriate things to say, because he got involved in Twitter. So his university eventually asked him to retire early for something that he had tweeted, and that kind of came as a shock to him because he was of that kind of older generation, doesn't quite understand how Twitter works, or how Twitter can get you canceled when you went for years and years without being canceled before. So that kind of hit him hard. So his whole kind of life and tragic end was sort of like a microcosm of the death of a certain era of conservatism in some sense. So I had to kind of pull all of that together, and then all of the personal things that I was feeling, the connection that I'd had with him. So I did one piece for the American Conservative right after he died, and then I did something on my Substack for the first anniversary. So those were pretty difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it's, or not just sometimes, I think almost all the time, it's difficult to make writing on something purely intellectual or business. But our heart is always involved in whatever we write. I think that's why
Absolutely.
it's so scary.
Yeah.
It's so scary to publish almost anything. Anything that's like that's worth publishing and putting out there, because to a certain extent you're putting yourself and you're putting your heart in something that really matters to you.
Exactly. Yeah, that's how I try to approach my whole kind of output as a writer. Like I want what I write to reveal something about my heart, and that can be a little bit vulnerable, and you decide what to put out there, what not to put out there. But that's the main thing that I like for people to take away from what I do, because I have chops. Yeah, I can be funny. I can be witty. I can kind of turn a phrase. But at the end of the day, all that stuff doesn't matter a whole lot if you're not sincere, if you're not earnest. So I hope that comes through. Above all else, I want my heart to come through.
Yeah. So in contrast to which was the most difficult, and I don't know, these might overlap, but what are one of the pieces you look back on, or articles, essays that you're most proud of?
Well, I put together quite a few in a year in review piece that I did last year, which you can link for folks in the show notes.
Yeah, that'll be in the show notes.
Yeah. So there's a lot that I could point to that I'm proud of in all different ways. A couple that I can highlight. I did a couple of tribute pieces last year. So I did one. My grandmother passed away, so I did something that was kind of a tribute to her life and legacy. And yeah, I mean, she was just one of these hidden lives. Like the quote about a hidden life. She was not a famous person. She didn't write or speak or anything. She just quietly lived her life unto the Lord and ministered to a lot of people. So it was a huge privilege for me to use my platform as a writer to spotlight and honor her. And I think about there's a passage towards the end of The Great Divorce where C.S. Lewis is walking in heaven, and they see a woman coming towards them, and she's surrounded by children and animals and like this whole menagerie of people who love her. And C.S. Lewis is like, who is this person? She must be really important. And George MacDonald's like, no, you wouldn't have heard of her. She was just Mrs. So-and-so. Oh, really? But now here in heaven, she's this person crowned with glory and honor. And so that was my grandmother. So that was one. And then another one that I was proud of, kind of in a similar vein, was about a neighbor I grew up with who was a veteran of World War II. And when I was 11 years old, I had a little tape recorder that I used to record some of his memories of the war. And for whatever reason, he decided to open up to me about things he hadn't even shared with like his own immediate family. But something about little 11-year-old me just kind of melted his heart and got him to open up. And so then I kept those recordings through the years. I digitized them, and then I went back and I blew the dust off and revisited them and kind of put them together in writing, and was just struck by what a remarkable story it was. It's some ways a little bit of an ordinary story, but just a beautiful piece of testimony, and just a way to honor a saint of my life whom nobody would ever have heard of otherwise.
Yeah.
And then let's see some other things I've done. I'm looking through like my own kind of year in review. So, I mean, there's some things that I've written around homosexuality. That's a topic that I tend to kind of circle back to, where I've done a lot of reading. Again, that I try to sort of come at in an atypical way. And I'm just proud of several different things that I've written in that vein, because again, I want to sort of get at the human side of it. So I've written some things that look back at the AIDS pandemic. And just sort of the human stories around that, and the human cost, because I want to kind of hold all of these different things in tension. It's important to write truthfully about it, but it's also important to see the grace of God at work, and it's important to to always have compassion for the lost, to have compassion for the sinner, because in the end, you're writing in the hope that God would draw all men to himself. So I feel like that's a tone and a balance that I've been able to strike pretty well in my writing around that topic. And just getting into some of these really dark, difficult waters, and hopefully navigating them in a truthful and compassionate way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's excellent. What do you hope for, and what do you hope to see in your future?
I don't know. I'd like to do more creative writing. So I've done a little bit of poetry, but I'd like to do more of that. I'd like to maybe put a chapbook together. That's what you call it when you get a bunch of them in one place. So that's definitely a goal. I'd like to write more short fiction. I've made like little dabblings in fiction over the last few years. I'm terrible at finishing things. I get easily distracted, but I think I have some ability in that area. So that's an area where I want to grow. I just have to commit and set aside the time for it. And then, I mean, as far as like career wise, I don't really know. I'm at the moment, I'm trying to kind of bloom where I'm planted at a small high school, but I'm probably not going to be here forever. Probably going to take another step later. So it could be continuing to teach at a high school level, could be moving to a university level. So we'll kind of see. I don't know if writing will ever be my main career, like the way I earn my livelihood. I think that's gotten really difficult these days. You really have to, it's a path, it's a train that I would have had to kind of board about 10 years ago, and to, get a certain kind of degree followed by a certain kind of internship, at a certain kind of legacy institution, and I just kind of missed that train. I'm 29 years old now, and I think freelancing is sort of, it's sort of the way of the future, which means that I'm going to probably always have to do some tent making, and I do that by teaching. But I love doing teaching, and so
Yeah.
I'm happy doing that currently.
Yeah, awesome. If you were to go back 10 years and talk to young Bethel, who was just getting started out, what would you tell her?
That's a great question. I was, gosh, young Bethel had some issues. Just being real. I was kind of a lonely kid, I was still learning how the internet worked, and I I was trying to use the internet for substitute community. Really, was what I think I was doing already then, and that could be a temptation now. So I think that yeah, that might be one piece of advice that I would give is, don't try to turn the internet into a place for substitute community, because it's not going to be able to do that for you. It's not going to be able to give that to you. And the people that you encounter that way, the people you try to make connections with, um, the virtual medium, when it's not incarnated, that can only go so far. Um, and there's a lot of time and emotional energy that I've kind of sunk into that, and unfortunately wasted, I think, in hindsight. Um, so yeah, I would say maybe do less of that. Let's see, what else would I say? What do I have? It's interesting because I did a whole degree in mathematics, like, which I don't even know that I really use it now, because I didn't just do a master's, I did a PhD.
Yeah.
So like that was like the track I took, and I talk about this in my coming out piece, but I was trying to avoid humanities so that I would be politically safe. Um, and now that, I mean, it turns out to not be necessary, and now I've come out anyway. So it's interesting to think about, like, what would I say to my 18-year-old self, knowing that I was going to be out in 10, 11 more years? Would I have said, like, don't spend your best years getting a math degree, maybe consider getting a humanities degree somewhere else instead. Maybe consider moving out sooner, because that was something I didn't do for a while. So yeah, I'd have to think. I don't know if I necessarily would have taken the same academic path that I did. Um, but there is a demand for math teachers that there isn't necessarily for literary teachers. And so, um, given, like I said, that it's so difficult to make a living at writing, you really have to be able to do something else. And I can't code. So learn to code is like the phrase for that.
Yeah.
So, like maybe I would have said do a master's, but don't do a PhD necessarily. Like you don't really have to do that. You can start looking for work right away. Um, but who knows? Like, would I be exactly where I am now if I had changed some of these things earlier in my life? Like maybe I never would have had the spare time to dive into Jordan Peterson, which wound up being the key that unlocked all this other stuff for me. So, it's I am where I am, but I think I would definitely say to not become so emotionally invested in online connection as I did at that time.
Yeah, I think that's good, and that's a great word and reminder to all of us.
Yeah,
Whether we're building a
especially now at the age of Twitter.
yeah, yeah, Twitter and TikTok and all the other ones that I don't understand. But yes, I think it's a
No.
great word, great word for all of us. Before we go, is there anything you want to leave our audience with, just based off this conversation and your work?
Yeah, I guess the be yourself. From Aladdin. That's what I've been kind of discovering this whole journey is how to be myself, discover who I am. So I guess that sounds a little bit banal, but you can put a Christian spin on it. Discover who uh, God has uniquely called you to be, what God has uniquely called you to do, um, and just follow that, and um, try not to build your life on a certain preset collection of expectations, whether those are cultural expectations, maybe even church cultural expectations, family expectations, whatever. Try to figure out what your particular calling is, and then discern it as best as possible.
Awesome. I think that's great. Great way to finish off. We started by talking about you releasing your true identity, like Batman, and so finishing with talking about being yourself. Full circle. Great.
There you go.
Great way to wrap
Didn't
up.
even plan it, but it worked out.
Yeah. Well, Bethel, just think. I kept saying it wrong. Bethel. Thank you.
Okay. Good.
You were supposed to catch me if I said it wrong. But thank you so much for your time and joining us on the show today. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun talking about writing and just social issues and everything else. So, like I said before, I'm a big fan of your writing, and so please keep it up. Keep doing the great work.
Thank you. And I really appreciate these questions because, this it's not the kind of question that I get to answer very often because, typically I'm being asked, what's your opinion on a specific thing? We touched on that a bit too. But I appreciate the chance to talk a little bit more personally about my work, what goes into my work, what goes into it personally for me. So thank you so much for having me on and giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, well, you're really welcome. I enjoyed it just as much. So once again, thank you for joining us on Filter. Thanks for listening. I hope this episode provided you with biblical clarity to live with confidence in our confusing world. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch up the latest from me, you can go to my website, aaronchamp.com. While you're there, subscribe to my newsletter so that you can be updated anytime I share new content. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Aaron M. Champ. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Until then, hold fast to the anchor.